Good morning. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Thank you for joining us. The Prime Minister has called a summit with the leaders of the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, saying the UK is best served when we work together. It comes after the First Minister of Scotland warned him not to block her push for a second Scottish independence referendum. The SNP leader said Boris Johnson would be picking a fight with the democratic wishes of the Scottish people if he tries to stop another independence vote. Well, let's take a look at the breakdown of the Scottish election results. The SNP fell one short of an overall majority, winning 64 seats. The Conservatives won 31, Labour 22 and the Liberal Democrats 4. There is a majority for pro-independence parties, though, as the Scottish Greens won 8 seats. Our political correspondent Joe Pike reports from Aberdeen.
Nicola Sturgeon secured the 4th SNP term she wanted, but not the majority she craved.
Just enjoy it.
Yet that's not stopping her push for another independence vote.
It is a commitment made to the people by a clear majority of the MSPs who have been elected to our national parliament. It is the will of the country. And given that outcome, there is simply no democratic justification whatsoever for Boris Johnson or indeed for anyone else seeking to block the right of the people of Scotland to choose our own future.
First Minister. In an attempt to pacify and placate the SNP, Boris Johnson has written to Nicola Sturgeon offering to talk. He writes, "I would like to invite you to join me, UK government colleagues and others at a summit meeting to discuss our shared challenges and how we can work together in the coming months and years to overcome them. I will be writing in similar terms to the First Minister of Wales and the First and Deputy First Ministers of Northern Ireland." Elsewhere, Sadiq Khan remains Mayor of London in a contest closer than expected.
The results of the elections around the UK show that our country and even our city remain deeply divided. So as we now seek to confront the enormity of the challenge ahead and as we endeavour to rebuild from this pandemic, we simply must use this moment of national recovery to heal those damaging divisions.
Other prominent mayors were also re-elected. Conservative Andy Street in the West Midlands and Labour's Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester. In Wales, Mark Drakeford kept his job and credited that win to his government's COVID-19 response. For now, the counting is over, in Scotland at least. Among the losers, the country's former First Minister, Alex Salmond. He had a rare taste of defeat, as his Alba party failed to win a single seat. But dividing lines remain here, and the path ahead is choppy. At this Scottish election, turnout was up and tactical voting was too, in particular pro-union Scots backing the party with the best chance of beating the SNP. But today, Scotland remains split on the central issue of independence, and it's almost 50-50. This country's constitutional journey is still far from over. Joe Pike, Sky News, Aberdeen.
Meanwhile, Labour's Deputy Angela Rayner has been sacked from her roles as party chair and campaign coordinator following the party's poor results in the English local elections. It has created conflict within the party, with Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham already saying he doesn't support Keir Starmer's decision. Our political correspondent Rob Powell is in Westminster for us this morning. And Rob, also a few of the papers pointing to a civil war within Labour that's erupting now.
Yeah, and I think what will maybe be concerning for the Labour leadership and Sir Keir Starmer, Gillian, is that, yes, there is a lot of criticism, and the most vocal criticism about the sacking of Angela Rayner as campaign coordinator and party chair. A lot of that is coming from people that were close to Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader, people on the left wing of the party. But the criticism isn't exclusively coming from that side of the party. You just mentioned Andy Burnham not agreeing with this move. He's hardly someone that can be said to be a Corbynista. But I think what they share is the concern that the story of these elections for Labour seems to be a story of them failing to cut through in areas in the north of England, in working class areas. So to make your first move after to sack someone who is a MP for the north of England that grew up there and that is one of the most senior working class women in the party, that is why eyebrows are being raised and people are saying that she should be given more of a focus rather than less. Now, those in Keir Starmer's office are saying that there still will be a role for Angela Rayner going forward, that she still will have a prominent role to play. But I think given that Keir Starmer said that he takes responsibility for this and that he takes responsibility for changing the party, many within Labour are wondering whether change should really start from the top and whether Sir Keir Starmer should maybe look a little bit closer to home as well.
Rob, thank you. Well, we now have plenty of results in from across Britain, with the Conservatives making gains in England, Labour holding on in Wales and the SNP storming ahead in the Holyrood elections. Joining me now to discuss some of those results, the former strategic advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Mills. Good morning to you. First of all, what do you make of this sacking of Angela Rayner in her two roles as campaign coordinator and party chairman?
To be honest, I think it's daft and uncalled for. I mean, I've worked with Angela Rayner. She's a very good campaigner. I don't think you could, in a million years, tie the results that have happened to her. These things tend to be collective decisions. I mean, look, let's be honest, these local election results are the worst we've had since 2008. The idea that it's one person is for the birds. It's not one person's fault. There should be a review of how we've performed, and that should be root and branch reform across sort of our methods, our funding, how we're actually going out campaigning. There's lots of things. For example, I was calling for where's our postal vote strategy in these elections, which is a bit of a no-brainer given the fact that there'll be a surge in postal votes. I didn't see that very well communicated. I don't think there really was one, and I'm speaking as someone who's worked in politics, can tell when there is a coherent one, and I didn't see it, whereas I could see the Tories and even the SNP seem to have one. And look, on this whole issue, today we should be talking about, the results on Friday were terrible for Labour. They're absolutely terrible. But we should have been talking about today where there has been some strong performances. You've seen, where I live in Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham re-elected with a landslide. We've pipped the Tories to the post in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough mayoralties. We've won the West of England mayoral election. We've great performances in Liverpool, Bristol and London. There are some things that Keir Starmer could be pointing today and talking up. And I actually think it's a bit of an insult to the members, activists and staff who have been working really hard to get those results, because yes, these are bad results, but you have some positive things. Instead, we're descending into a debate this morning about the civil war in the Labour Party, which is uncalled for and should not be happening. And I can't defend it. I don't think anyone serious can defend it. And I think it's managed to unite the Labour Party, ironically, from all its wings, anger at this decision overnight.
Joining us for this debate now, former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. Morning to you. There are those that say that really the success of the Conservatives isn't down to anything that they've done in particular, but rather it's the failings of Labour that people have been responding to. What would you say to that?
I think that what we are seeing is the Conservative Party being rewarded for a record of delivery. This is really about the investment that the country has seen from the Conservatives, particularly in areas, in the Teesside area where we've seen investment via the Towns Fund, and we've got, the Darlington campus moving up north. I think these are all really positive signals to the country. The government is very serious about its levelling up agenda, and that is what the country has endorsed in these set of local and mayoral elections.
Not about punishing Labour?
No, I think Labour's lack of appeal is a decade-long problem that it's failing to grasp. And there is an issue with the fact that Keir Starmer certainly isn't cutting through and convincing the country that Labour has really changed. I mean, I was really struck by Mandelson's comment that the history of the Labour Party in elections has been lose, 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 Blair, 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 lose, 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 lose. And its failure to reckon with that reality is why it is failing to appeal. But nevertheless, the Conservative strength is what has delivered this set of election results.
James, you want to come in there?
Yeah, no, I heard that thing from Mandelson. Look, people forget that Peter Mandelson was running the 2010 general election for Gordon Brown. So, look, Peter Mandelson is outdated. I mean, the last time he won something, there weren't smartphones or social media. I think,
but he did manage to keep Hartlepool, though.
yeah, at a time when Labour was doing really well. I mean, I think we could have won a Hartlepool, regardless of whether Peter Mandelson was there. And to be totally honest with you, I think that in a nutshell sums up the ridiculousness and the poor communications during this campaign. We went on an issue of sleaze, and then we had Peter Mandelson on a doorstep and was campaigning with him, whose track record and CV is actually not very strong in this area. Now, I'd turn around and I'd flip that. I think we performed really poorly. I think our strategy going to these local elections was anonymous. Our communications were terrible. We didn't have a clear message. We started on the NHS and we veered off over everything else, never came back to it. We couldn't answer very clearly a simple question about how our position on nurses' pay. And whether the Tories are delivering, I think it flatters the Tories, to be totally honest. I don't think they're doing a particularly good job. I think they're getting a bit of a bounce, yes, from the COVID, from the vaccination rollout, which was led by the NHS. But I've been on council estates the past few weeks, and I've been across many different areas. And I'll tell you that I've been getting a lot of people very upset. They're very worried about the future. They're worried about the economy, about public funding for public services, and what the prospects are ahead. And I don't necessarily think that there's let's just say that they're overwhelmed with the Conservatives. I think the problem is they're waiting for Labour to turn up and offer us a good vision and alternative for the future. And I think that's what Labour need to do over the next few months. If they
Anita, do you think there's some truth in that there has been, as many of the papers have described it, the vaccination bounce, the Boris bounce, because we are in a pandemic? It's very difficult for an opposition to disagree with what the Prime Minister and the government are spearheading.
I think that it's a vaccination bounce. To use this phrase, I think it's a little glib when you consider the level of success and the difference that the government's regime and rollout has made to this country and to saving literally thousands, if not millions of lives. And that is not guaranteed. And we've seen the record across Europe that actually this is a very challenging program to execute well. And I think James really talks down the success and the effort that has gone into delivering that, not just from NHS staff, but also from ministers that have overseen the rollout of this system. I also want to pick up on this point. James, I'm sure he has been on a couple of council estates over the past few weeks. I am canvassing every single weekend and have been doing so since it's been legal to do so in my patch where I'm a councillor. And what I can tell you is, yes, voters are concerned about the future. They are concerned about the economy. They are concerned about recovery from COVID. And what they see is that the Conservatives offer a better path, a build back greener path that does naturally appeal. And what we saw in the West Midlands, what we saw with Andy Street, is that this focus on investment and on tangible benefits for the region is what's really been rewarded in this election.
Just allow James to come back in there.
I've been on a couple of council estates, and also I'm a kid from a council estate, just so you know.
Where am I?
Background. And so to be brutally honest with you, so it's not like something I don't notice. I'll tell you what they've seen happening to working people in the government. A lot of it's the fire and rehire, where for working class people right now who work in some very sort of working class jobs, I've seen their terms and conditions destroyed, and the government will have their finger on it. They're seeing the pay frozen, not just in the last few years, but over the last 10 years, and I don't see the government lifting the finger on it. So I don't necessarily think it's as rosy as you think. And look, you don't say there's a vaccine bounce. Look at the polls. You can see about before the vaccine was bounced out, Labour actually ahead, and where you've seen the real decline has been from that. So I don't think you can rule out that vaccine bounce, but I'm not trying to justify Labour by it. It's run a really poor campaign.
Let's take a look now at the other stories making the news this morning. At least 58 people, believed to be mostly female students, have died in an explosion close to a school in the Afghan capital, Kabul. More than 150 others were also reportedly injured in the blasts, which the country's president, Ashraf Ghani, has blamed on the Taliban, who have denied responsibility. At least 80 people have reportedly been injured outside the old city of Jerusalem during a second night of violence as tensions continue to soar over the threatened eviction of Palestinians in the Sheikh Jarrah neighbourhood. Israeli police on horses and in riot gear fired stun grenades and water cannon at crowds, while Palestinian protesters threw stones. Tens of thousands of Muslims attended prayers yesterday, marking Laylat al-Qadr, the holiest night in the month of Ramadan. 3 people, including a 4-year-old girl, have been injured after being shot in a fight that broke out in New York's Times Square. Police say the child who was shot in the leg and 2 other victims, both women, are expected to survive. Rail passengers could face days of disruption after cracks were found on a number of high-speed trains. Hitachi 800 trains were pulled from lines yesterday as a precautionary measure, with Great Western Railway and London North Eastern advising people not to travel today. Time to take a look at the weather now with Isabel, and it is much nicer than it was yesterday, isn't it?
I know. It's really nice, yeah. I mean, it did get to about 18 degrees. We were so close to the really warm air over in France, where temperatures were into the low 20s, you know, but we are tapping into that again today across the southeast and East Anglia. I should think temperatures could comfortably reach around 21 or 22 degrees. Very nice indeed. Let's take a look at the whole picture, though.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Yeah, an absolutely stunning day actually across the near continent. And we have seen one or two thunderstorms actually just creeping into the channel, affecting Kent this morning. That's in the warmer air. They'll move away quite quickly this morning. Then I should think across East Anglia in the southeast today, it'll be mostly fine through daylight hours with temperatures into the low 20s. Now elsewhere, well, as you can see, we've got low pressure, which is the main trigger for the showers across northern and western areas. Blustery winds coming up from the south, some heavy showers expected. And we've still got the remnants of yesterday's rain, particularly through the Midlands and up into South Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. That zone of cloud should gradually thin and break, and hopefully it'll turn just a little bit drier and brighter there to end the day. So these are the sort of temperatures: 15 through the central belt of Scotland, 20 to 22 in the southeast. But just watch for another area of showers to brew up across France. They could well move into southeastern parts of the country during this evening and overnight, and eventually tomorrow they could well push up into northeast Scotland. Otherwise tomorrow, a repeat performance, sunshine and showers.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Nicola Sturgeon is making her move towards a new referendum vote, saying that no UK government should stand in the way of the democratic rights of the Scottish people. But what's the appetite amongst voters for another bout of constitutional wrangling? Our Scotland correspondent James Matthews reports.
Let's go. It will take some working out. After the election, what now for the timing and tempo of a campaign for independence?
So the overall kind of thing happening in England is not really what Scotland wants, to have a Conservative government.
Is there a bigger difference now? Are we just different from the rest of the UK, do you think?
I don't think it's different as such. We just believe in different things.
I voted SNP, but I'm not quite ready to go through the whole yes vote again. I think that tore a lot of the country apart.
This was the Yes campaign in 2014, in a referendum endorsed by a British Prime Minister after an SNP majority in a Scottish election. Blair Jenkins led that Yes campaign. What does he say now?
I would accept that right now it's about 50-50 in terms of people being for independence or against independence. That's obviously from a yes point of view, that's a very good starting point. It's a much better starting point than there was back in 2012 when the last campaign started.
With a focus already on a referendum, when, how and what if Boris Johnson blocks it, how do pro-India MSPs who relish change realise it?
I think both sides really have a responsibility to look afresh at the economic case, both for independence and for the Union. And you know, those who want to suggest that Brexit Britain is a good place where Scotland can thrive and become a fairer, more equal and greener society, I think they have the harder job on their hands.
Dumbarton Rock was a hard place for the SNP. It lost a titanic struggle with Labour for the marginal Dumbarton seat. If there was a red wall in this election, this was it, and it needs rebuilt.
What Labour needs to demonstrate in all of our work at Holyrood is that we can deliver that better, fairer society with the powers that the Scottish Parliament has got.
As SNP supporters are quick to point out, David Cameron delivered Brexit after an election in which he won a share of the vote far lower than the SNP have at this one.
Right, Connell, let's go.
It's a discussion that's exercised this country through 14 years of SNP government.
3, 2.
And counting. James Matthews, Sky News, Glasgow.
Let's talk some more now about where Scotland goes next. We're joined from St Andrews by the former SNP MP Stephen Gethins and from Inverness by the former Conservative SNP Mary Scanlon. Good morning to you both. First of all, Stephen Gethin, to you. We know that Nicola Sturgeon has missed her dearest wish, that overall majority. Does it therefore mean that she doesn't have the mandate that she said she would require to go for a second independence referendum?
Of course not. And I think you're sort of comparing two different things. Of course, at the Westminster system, you look at majorities, which are delivered on a minority of votes. But in this election, the SNP has won. And you have a pro-independence majority in Parliament. The SNP took more constituencies than have ever been taken before, and a higher share of the vote than have ever been taken before. And I think in about 48% of the vote. And bear in mind, Boris Johnson is making radical changes to the United Kingdom and to our relationship with Europe, to the extent of even talking about a no-deal Brexit, on his thumping majority of 80, based on about 42.5% of the vote. It's a parliamentary democracy. The same rules apply. Nicola Sturgeon won, and she won well. The SNP won, and she won well. And what normally happens in the aftermath of a win is you talk about implementing the winners' manifestos.
Mary Scanlon, as Stephen Gethin says, there is a pro-independence party majority now. Does that therefore mean that we will see a second referendum on independence, in your view?
Well, it's interesting, Stephen Gethin talks about implementing the manifesto. The manifesto is to try and address our very poor and declining education system, the worst drug deaths in the whole of Europe, and people having to wait over 6 years for orthopaedic surgery. All of a sudden, we've hardly wakened up from the results, and the independence referendum is top of the agenda. Can I just say, I've been over 40 years in the Scottish Conservatives. I've been through Mrs Thatcher, the poll tax, you name it, and I've never known anything so divisive, so tearing the country apart as much as another referendum. And I looked with envy, I have to say, when I listened to the Labour First Minister for Wales yesterday, and all credit to him, talking about working together, talking about a stable and progressive government. And if only we had that in Scotland. We've got 5 years of divisiveness, confrontation, picking battles with Westminster. It's really quite depressing when you look at the public services that are declining.
Stephen, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mary's fighting the old battles of the election there. Look, what you do the day you fight these battles during an election, and we heard all these awful stories from the Conservative Party. Remember, in terms of domestic policy, the SNP is most trusted. In terms of education, in terms of health, all these other areas, Nicola Sturgeon not only was the most trusted in the polls, but was actually endorsed in an election. And we're in the aftermath of an election. So I think she's right in one sense that you move on and you look at what did the winning party seek to do. And in terms of whether or not there's a mandate, I don't think you can count Green votes as being somehow anti-independence. There's an independence majority. And Mary raised the Welsh First Minister, who said, of course, you know, if Scotland votes to have an independence referendum, it should have an independence referendum. So Mary's trying to fight these old arguments. What you do after an election is you look at the results, you look at what the people have said, and you implement that. And that's the way our democracy works, whether some of us like it or not. I don't like the fact we're being dragged out of the EU against our will. I didn't like the 42.6% delivering that Tory majority, but it's what we've got. But Scotland can choose something different. In fact, not only can it choose something different, it chose something different a couple of days ago.
But these are not old arguments, Stephen. A government is elected to govern, not just to pick battles within a United Kingdom. It's elected to represent the people. It's elected to help the ladies in Inverness who tell me they have to wait 6 years to get a hip replacement. We've already been through 4 years of tortuous negotiations with Europe. It would be 10 times worse trying to go through
Actually, Mary, I sat away.
Please focus on the people and the public services. And I mean, why can't Nicola just work with Boris Johnson?
Stephen, If I can come in there, Stephen, you were saying it should be about the policies going forward and looking to the future. Well, I wonder what you make of Boris Johnson's calling of a devolved summit, the letter that's been written inviting Nicola Sturgeon and the other First Ministers to talk about the future and working together. Is that something you welcome?
Well, look, first of all, if I could just deal with one of the things that Mary said, and I think this is important. Over the coming days, Nicola Sturgeon will appoint education ministers, health ministers, transport ministers, finance ministers, all the ministers who have got the jobs of getting on with the job in government. And of course, people in Scotland think that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP government has been doing a much better job the Conservatives have been doing. If they didn't, they wouldn't have elected the SNP and overwhelmingly rejected the Conservatives. Now, Mary might not like that, and that's fine, and that's Mary's opinion, and she'll have voted a different way. In terms of Boris Johnson, well, he's not done an awful lot. You know, when it came to things like COP26 and trying to engage on that, I can remember being at Westminster when we, as a group at Westminster, tried to engage with the Conservatives about making Brexit better, and I was part of a cross-party coalition who managed to get legislation done. But any idea of cross-party talks around making that better were overwhelmingly rejected. The Tories decided to work with the DUP and put money into Northern Ireland, again, as part of that governing coalition that they pulled together. So if Boris Johnson wants to talk, that's fine, talk, and let's see what he's got to say.
Mary.
But his track record isn't terribly good.
You're not trying to look forward, Stephen. You've accused me of talking about the past. Try and look forward. We're in a united kingdom. Let's work together. Let's put the people first. Let's put health, education, the worst drug deaths, 14 years of SNP failure. Let's work together in Scotland, but across the United Kingdom.
Mary Scanlon and Stephen Gethins. I'm afraid we must leave it there. We'll end on that positive note from Mary there, working together for the future. We shall see if that happens. A surge in demand for beer post-lockdown has offered a glimmer of hope for the struggling pub industry, but the demand has also led to shortages of the alcoholic beverage, with breweries increasing their production in a bid to meet the demand. Our North of England correspondent Tom Parmenter reports.
You only get good beer by being meticulous.
But if we don't put it in a totally clean cask, all that great work is ruined.
After the worst year possible and losses of £1.3 million, the Timothy Taylor's brewery in Keighley is now battling to keep up with demand. Last weekend, for the first time since 1858, they brewed on a Sunday.
But, you know, if I tell you the last 2 weeks, we've done similar volumes to what we did in the same 2 weeks in 2019. So that's, you know, unbelievable against that forecast that people gave us. I just think there's loads of pent-up demand, particularly amongst those who don't like braving the cold. So when it goes indoors, I think it'll bring out a whole nother, you know, group of consumers.
They may not have quite as much tradition, but at this microbrewery in an old tram shed in Saltaire, they're also seeing sales at pre-pandemic levels, even without their indoor space open. It's so good, in fact, that some premium mainstream lagers are now being rationed by their suppliers.
I'm surprised that they're running out already, very much so.
It's only the second time I've come out, but to actually have like a pulled pint, it's been really nice. You just can't get it anywhere else, can you?
I missed it without a doubt, you know. You know, it's not embarrassing to say, but I have missed it.
I think you've missed the social side.
Yeah, and the social side
more
of
than
it, yeah.
anything.
There are many hospitality businesses that just haven't made it this far or are still waiting to reopen. But the need for people to reconnect socially is strong.
Cheers.
And it's been freezing cold at night, and you know I couldn't imagine sitting outside. And the beer gardens have been full of people, you know, blankets, coats. The same with the rain, in the hail. And I think that's the one message we'd like to send from the breweries. You know, thank you to the British public for kind of braving the elements and returning to the pub.
The big brewers say the supply problems will be rectified. It is a problem, but in the context of COVID, it is a good problem to have. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, West Yorkshire.
I'm not going to say anything about the beer because it might be misunderstood.
The problem is whenever there's a story about beer, now we're all talking about... Well, we are listening to the package, obviously, with Tom Parmenter, but we're also chatting about alcohol, which is the problem, because we all get a bit excited.
Drinking outside in the sun,
maybe? I know, and
possibility?
we can sit outside today. Can we all? Well, some of you might need a brolly, but that's fine. Yeah, my brother last week had fish and chips with hailstones in it because he lives in the Highlands.
Nice.
And today you could have a similar sort of thing. Let's take a look.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So we are still looking pretty unsettled. We had low pressure yesterday. The low itself not quite as deep as it was, so the weather perhaps not quite so gusty, but there will still be showers around. It'll drive in showers with this southerly breeze as well. The heaviest, I should think, today will be across Ireland and Northern Ireland and running up into Scotland, a few across western areas of England and Wales. Now, across more central parts of England this morning, it's quite damp. The cloud will gradually shift eastwards, but it'll probably break up a little bit. And then ahead of that, across East Anglia and the southeast, it's warm. 20 to 22 degrees. That's where it really will feel very nice this afternoon. But just if you're out late, bear in mind that there will be some thunderstorms this evening. And the theme stays pretty showery throughout the next few days, but at least less frosty by night, which is good news.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
With us now to take us through the newspapers, the parliamentary sketch writer and Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant and the political editor of the Sunday Mirror, Nigel Nelson. Welcome back to you both. Starting with you, first of all, Madeline, and having a look at the Observer Online in this instance and the re-election of Sadiq Khan as Mayor of London, perhaps a closer run race than people had predicted, with Sean Bailey for the Conservatives doing a lot better than people thought.
Yes, that's exactly right. Even though Sadiq Khan has now won by, I think, around 55 to 45% of the final tally, as you say, his victory was a lot less convincing than many predicted. And The Guardian reports that there was a big late surge in support for Sean Bailey. But it's very interesting to note because there were polls until pretty recently giving Sadiq Khan as much as a 25-point lead. So there may be an element of a failure of polling here, but I think it does also make you wonder what the Tories might have achieved in London if they hadn't run such a half-hearted campaign and perhaps chosen somebody more of a political heavyweight for their candidate. You know, it wasn't actually very long ago that the Tory bosses were busy withdrawing funds from the campaign and scaling back his team to a kind of skeleton crew because they genuinely thought it was a no-hoper. So perhaps this tells us that there was perhaps a greater level of dissatisfaction with Sadiq Khan than many realised, and also that shy Tories can be found everywhere, even in London.
Shy Tories, I like that description. The Mail, Nigel, they're looking at, this is interesting, as Andy Burnham being tipped for the next Labour leader. Not that that contest has been started, but...
No, indeed. No, it hasn't yet. But yes, I mean, he more or less sort of ruled himself in yesterday. Didn't say he was going to challenge Keir Starmer, but he said if the call came from Labour for a new leader, he might rise to the challenge.
Oh, I thought actually, because he spoke to Sophie Ridge, I thought he actually ruled himself out. And that he was saying that he would help Labour, but it wasn't something he was thinking about because he was so enjoying his role as Mayor of Greater Manchester.
That's right. He's not talking about challenging Keir Starmer now. He's talking about not ruling out a challenge should Keir Starmer go. And Keir has probably got another year, really, to actually pull things round. Otherwise, he probably will go. My own feeling is that the next Labour leader almost certainly has to be a woman. The Labour Party has never had one. So I would see someone like Yvette Cooper or Rachel Reeves being more likely. But Andy may well have a go. He's lost twice before. He lost to Ed Miliband in 2010 and to Jeremy Corbyn in 2015. So you never know, third time lucky.
We shall see. To Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon vowing to continue with her drive towards a second independence referendum. This is in the Observer, Madeline.
Yes, and I would say that this is really more of a kind of a dog bites man story than a man bites dog. It's entirely predictable that Nicola Sturgeon has called for another independence referendum on the basis that the SNP won the Holyrood elections. But, you know, I would argue that it's not at all obvious where this mandate comes from. I mean, it's not just the case that the SNP failed to secure the overall majority that Alex Salmond, for example, managed to achieve in 2011, and that formed the basis for much of their mandate for the 2014 referendum. But also the pro-unionist parties narrowly edged the elections, getting just over 50% of the vote. So I think, and given also that the SNP deliberately tried to speak as little as possible about the prospect of indie ref 2 during the election campaign, because they knew that that the prospect was quite a turn-off for floating voters. I think to reignite it now and so soon after the event seems like very unscrupulous behaviour, though I don't think it should come as a surprise to anyone who's been interested in events north of the border.
Nigel, to the Express, a completely different story. We've all sort of got used to our online consultations with GPs and medical professionals, but this is looking at the fact that doctors are being told now to start seeing patients face-to-face again.
Yes, that's right. And the Royal College of GPs will produce a report this coming week on telemedicine and what the future of it is. I do think that after the pandemic, the whole of society will need some kind of reset. So the economy is going to be changed. Our working practices are obviously changing. We'll probably be re-looking at how benefits are paid, for instance. Same thing applies to medicine. And one of the things that I think that the pandemic has shown is that you can quite effectively do online consultations with your GP. So even if you do an e-consult, you can just put in a load of questions, which is more or less what the GPs use themselves to work from. Outline your symptoms. It allows you to say things you might have forgotten if you were doing it face-to-face. The important thing then is it should be only a triage system. So yes, let's have more remote consultations, but the moment it looks like there is something which needs a face-to-face appointment, make sure the GP gives it.
Yes, Zoom working in some cases in the world of medicine, but not so for magicians in the Telegraph, Madeline.
Yes, I really love this story because, you know, we're all struggling to adapt to the new normal as best we can. But here is an example of a profession that I hadn't really considered. It's about magicians and how they are struggling to adapt with giving their performances on Zoom and streaming platforms. Because it's all filmed, it means that viewers have a much better chance, or could have, of spotting the secrets of the magician code, you know, how they perform their tricks. So the magicians are reportedly having to work twice as hard to prevent the beady-eyed viewer from potentially unravelling their secrets.
Why are you more likely to see the tricks on Zoom than you would on a normal programme?
I think it's just that you could whiz it back and keep watching, and often that their tricks rely on sleight of hand and people being distracted, and
right.
And I would imagine that is much easier to carry off in person, particularly if you're on a stage with lights and so on. I think Zoom would just bring the viewer that closer and give them a chance to watch it multiple times.
Yeah, and I guess it's a tighter shot on Zoom. Vegetables, Nigel. Tell us more.
Indeed. This is a new idea where you can rent someone's garden to grow your own veg. At the moment, allotments are very hard to come by. So it all started off with someone in London who put a pot of basil on their window. Then they wanted to grow onions and potatoes and had nowhere to do it. So what he did was then rent a neighbour's garden. This is now growing, and there's going to be a digital platform launched this week, which basically is to link up people who love vegetables with people who've got unloved gardens.